Hi, welcome to this Excel tutorial video. Today we're going to talk about pivot tables. This video was recorded in February 2021 using Excel 365. So a pivot table in Excel is a way of working with a large set of data. So it's a way of taking specific elements of data in a larger set and narrowing down and focusing on those smaller elements and getting summary data of those smaller elements of the larger piece. Easy maybe if I do some examples. So let us look at on screen here. I've got a large-ish piece of data, large in the fact that it hasn't got a lot of columns, but it's got a lot of rows, and I want to summarize my data. And to do that, I'm going to use a pivot table. So first of all, put your cursor somewhere in the data set that you're interested in interrogating. Then you go to Insert and you click on Pivot Table. You get this Create Pivot Table box. It pops up. By default, Excel will try and assume the boundaries of your data. So if we look here, it's saying it's going to go from A2 to F56. So Excel looks at the potential header row, which A2, row 2 is. So it presumes that's the beginning of your data, and then it just goes down to the last cell that's actually got data in, and it says, okay, is that the range? And in this case, yes, it is. You've also got, you could change that. So you can change that here. You can click on that button here and change the data range, but it's correct for this case. Then it says, do you want your pivot table to be in a new worksheet, or do you want it to be on the existing worksheet? So depending on kind of how big your data cell is, maybe you'd want to move your pivot table to a new worksheet. In this example, I'm going to keep it on the existing worksheet. And when I select that, I've got to select the location, and I do that by clicking on this arrow here. It takes me back to Excel, so I will say I want my pivot table to begin and here, this cell here. You can see the location there, and then I press this button again. It takes me back to the Create Pivot Table window, and I click OK. So a number of things happen when I click OK. First of all, it brings up this little pivot table pane here. On the right hand side, you've now got this new pivot table set of options here that we're going to interact with in a second, and also you've got some new toolbars that have appeared here. So we'll look at some of these bits in a second, but let us just start by getting some data in our pivot table. So what I want to know in my pivot table is I want to know how much I have billed my customers, the amount of the bills that I have sent to my customers. So let's begin first of all with customer. So if I put a tick in customer, by ticking that box, it's put customer in the rows column here, which is fine because that's kind of what I want my pivot table to be based on. I want it to be about my customers, so I've ticked that. Now I want it to show the amount, the bill amount. So if I tick this box, Excel will assume that you want to summarize the amount data, and in this case it's true, I do. So here it says, okay, within this set of data here on the left, ABC Limited has had £5,119 worth of bills, and I can format this in the usual way to make it 2 decimal places and all that sort of stuff. So there's all of my customers, and there is the amount of bills in this data set, the total sum of the bills for each customer. If I go down here and I click on this arrow here, and I go to value field settings, I can change the aggregate kind of the way that the data is being looked at. So instead of saying I want the sum of it, I want to know the maximum value, the most that I've sent in a single invoice. So if I click OK on that, these values now change. So it says, all right, ABC Limited, the maximum bill you sent them was for £1,654. For company 123, it was £1,734. And if we look at our data, I can see there for company 123, there is there one for £1,734. Or I can change that and say what's the least amount of that I've sent to them. But really, what I want is the sum or the average. There's a lot of options here, so let's just choose the sum. So now, also what I want to know is how many invoices I've sent them. So if I put a tick in this box here for invoice, Excel will now say, what do you want to know? Do you want invoice to be in your row column here, so it shows you the value of each invoice? No, I don't. So what I can do, there's a couple of things I can do. I can drag this across here to my values, which is where I want it to be, or I can untick it and drag it down to my values from here. Either way, I want it in my values column here. And then it presumes, because of the type of data that is in the invoice column, it says, okay, do you want to know the amount, the count of invoices per customer? And that's exactly what I want. So here I've got how many invoices per customer and the value of those invoices. And then I can say, give me the outstanding value as well. And there's the total outstanding. So as it turns out, everything, customer XYZ has paid all of their 6 invoices in full. Nothing outstanding. One last thing we can look at here is we can add filters. So by clicking on, sorry, I cancel that. By clicking on this drop down here, we can add this as a filter. If I just drag this into there, if I click on this drop down, it'll say these are your options, yes or no, and that's true because the paid column just has yes and no in here. So I'll say I only want to say where they've been paid, and so that says this is the amount of invoices. This is the amount of invoices. This is the value of all the invoices that have been fully paid, and obviously then there's going to be 0 outstanding because the filter is paid. Okay, if we click away from our pivot table back into somewhere else in Excel, all of this stuff disappears. If we click back in our pivot table, now this appears again and our new toolbars appear. So if ever you're working with pivot tables and suddenly you lose all of the options, it's because you've ticked away from your pivot table. If you click back into it, you'll get all those options again. So let us do another example. So let me go back into my data set and I go to insert pivot table and I'll say a new worksheet. So click OK for that. And in this example, what I want to know is I want to look at the invoice dates. So let's click on invoice date, and Excel recognizes this column to have dates in. So it says, okay, as part of the information I want to show you, I'm going to roll it up so we're just seeing months rather than individual days of the month. So we're going to roll it up into months. So if I then say, show me the amount of bills, it'll say, okay, in September you build near £4,000, in October you build 6.5, and in November you build or just over 9. And then you can click on this little plus here and it will give you more information. But by default, it kind of rolls it up, so it summarizes this data. And one last thing I wanted to talk about, if I go back to this tab here. So it's essentially the same data, but I've added an extra few columns to it. So what I've got here is I've got quarter 1 data, and then I've got quarter 2 data here. So if I wanted to do a pivot table based on this whole set of data, actually that should be September, October, November, December, January, February. So imagine that's September. But so if I wanted to do a pivot table based on all of this, I can. But when you're doing a pivot table, Excel will try and find a header row. And the header row it will find is row 2. So it won't see row 1. You can't select row 1 the way it's set up at the minute. So if I go to insert pivot table, excuse me, it immediately says, okay, I want to go from A2 to K56. Okay. If I say, no, I want you to start at A1, I want you to start at the very top. If I try that, I'll get an error message and it'll say, I don't really get it. I need, you can say here, it needs to be organized so that you can get a list of labeled columns, which is why it needs a header row, a single header row. Okay. So it won't accept that. So if I go and change that back to 2, it will accept that. And I'll just put it in a new worksheet. Now what happens is, you've got your customer, then you've got invoice and paid and outstanding in those columns, and then you've got the same columns again, so it's put 2 next to it because the columns have got the same name and you can't have duplicate names, it'll just get confusing. So if I wanted to say, okay, for each customer, show me the amount outstanding for the Q1 and the amount outstanding for Q2, you can do it, and I'm sorry that the figures are the same, it's just because I've duplicated test data. You can do it, and these are essentially looking at different sets of data, but the headers aren't really that helpful. So if we go back to here, and instead of having Q1 here, we go to this amount and say, we just change this Q1, and we'll change this Q1. Oh, honestly, Q2. I think we should put there really. If we go back to our pivot table here, and we go to pivot table analysis and refresh our pivot table, you now see here it's removed the columns for amount because we've kind of got rid of the amount because we've renamed them. So now we've got Q1 amount and we've got Q2 amount, and now at least we're seeing something that kind of makes a little bit more sense. That's the end of this video. I hope you found it helpful.